So thank you again, Alan and Mia, for being here with us today. And we are again here to try and unite narratives through film and arts, and let's give it a go. We'll see where it takes us. So I just want to, for the first question is, I'm very interested in the kind of motivations behind choosing these indigenous communities, so the Kogi and the Wayu and the Kogi in particular, considering that there are so many different indigenous communities in Latin America.
Well, the first point is that it was in a sense the Kogi that chose me rather than me choosing the Kogi. I think I'd already said that they said, we need to speak because we can help you. And I thought that was a very extraordinary statement and one that needed to be heard globally. There are, of course, other indigenous communities in the Sierra that, as I said, Tarona related, the Arhuaco, the Ica, and the Canguamo. But the difference is degree of acculturation. The Kogi had been much less acculturated than any of the others. The Kogi was the only group with a leadership that did not speak Spanish, which is very important, I think. And therefore, from my perspective, they were the people that I really wanted to be hearing from. They decided, for reasons which were probably mistaken, that I was somebody that they could work with. And since then, we have had a long and terrifying relationship.
Well, I want to hear why it was such a insight. Mia, was that something similar? Do you feel a calling from them in that sense as well?
It was a very, very organic process. When I decided to go back to Colombia, I had a connection with the Wayu community, and I wanted to through family, but I wanted to research a community that was more isolated, and that's why I chose the Kogi community. It was a very difficult, very difficult approach. I tried for over a year to contact them, and then suddenly, out of the blue, it just happened. And I think that is very, very important what you said, because when I arrived there, it was a very important and transitional period in this community, in this specific community inside the Kogi community. So I think that it was important that I was there.
So you've mentioned that it was difficult and that it was terrifying, and these sort of imply a sense of challenges that surely have been presented and that you've both touched upon in your communities. Could you expand a bit more on the challenges in bringing the two cultures together, yours personally and having the scientists from the Western scientists come to work with the ancestral knowledge of the Kogi, and the artists coming from the UK to Colombia and to work with these communities?
Well, bringing Western scientists to the Kogi was not the terrifying thing. That was something that the Western scientists were extremely nice about, and the Kogi were extremely keen to have happen. No, the terrifying bits with the Kogi are twofold. Firstly, the burden of responsibility, which is close to intolerable. And that, if you're in that situation, you're the guy who went in there and said, come on, I can help you speak to the world, open the door, we'll let the world in. You are then, to some degree, answerable for everything that happens afterwards. I did say to them before ever beginning, look, here are all the reasons why this is a very bad idea. And I would advise you to say no, go away. On the other hand, here are the reasons why I suppose you might think it's a good idea, but it's nothing to do with me, you guys decide, and if you say no, you're never going to see me again. And I was sincerely hoping they would say no. You have the physical challenge, simply, when I was making this last film, Aluna, was the first time I actually went all the way up on ground level rather than having the benefit of a BBC helicopter to get me up there. I mean, it is a hell of a journey, and it's the steep side of the Sierra. And the Sierra is divided into river valleys, into cuencas, and different cuencas are very, very different from each other. And I don't think you can generalize about what goes on in one cuenca happening in another. The degree of communication between the different cuencas is very limited. When I first went into the Sierra, nobody knew where there were Kogi in some of the cuencas. Nobody had any contact with some of the cuencas. What happens in one cuenca does not necessarily happen in another. Also, there's the business of the sheer level of intrusion of the Colombian violence in the Sierra. I have made relatively few trips in which my life has not been under threat, it's only because of the extent to which the Kogi take care of me that I have not been caught up in violence, paramilitary or guerrilla. Once or twice the guerrillas have actually called off their activities when I was in the area because in those years I had a good reputation. But you never know what the story is that's been told about you while you've been away. And the story is what matters. So it is terrifying, and I keep hoping that they say don't come back. The next visit that I have next month is going to be taking place on the coast, not up in the mountain. I believe this is because of a formal written request from the mule that I usually ride, not to have him on its back.
Well, we're very happy you are here to tell the story. We'll hear about the mule story next time. Mia, how about you?
There were challenges. There were some challenges going to La Sierra. As I said, when repeatedly, when I arrived, was one of the Mamos, eldest Mamos in the community died, and there were all the Mamos from all the Sierra were going to the funeral. So we were prevented to go to the community in the first place. We had to wait at the beginning of the mountain in one specific area that I later learned, because basically they told me you have to be there. They just told us you have to go to this town. You cannot move from there. And there were armed forces there, and then they asked us. They stopped us. At one point, a person arrived and said, "Excuse me, if you want to continue here, you have to pay this money now." And there was somebody with a motorbike just there, and you knew. And every time we were walking up, then when that happened, I paid whatever I had to pay. And then every time I was turning my back, because I had a big responsibility. I have artists with me from London. When we were going to visit after that episode to happen, and then we were able to go to the other town. Every time we were walking inside the Sierra, and it's the first time that I say it publicly, there was someone behind us all the time. We just turned our head, and there was always someone looking at us all the time. So it is. I thought that finished in Colombia, but somehow, because you have all these stories that the situation in Colombia, it gets better and that, but no, I revived all my memories from childhood in Colombia.
Sort of, I mean, what you've been doing, it's extremely interesting, and there is again this multiplicity of cases that we're trying to question as well of what are the single narratives, the many narratives, and I think it's really interesting that the reason why you're going there in the first place is to look at the land and the materials and take these artists to experience hand to hand the importance of the land for these peoples. So my question is, how can we be more conscious on the environment and work with the communities there and the people who are visiting. You both mentioned a little bit about the rushes of tourism that are in Colombia now. So how to awaken a bit of the consciousness of the land and the materials and the territory there, whether it's through film and engaging them or through art directly. How can you, those threads that we were talking about, how can we better create an emphasis on that?
I think that this is unit is all over the world. The consciousness about the use of plastic is imperative. I think that in these communities in particular, I have a picture here of it's an image that was I don't have it in there, but is the introduction of plastic in the weaving. This is a Kogi community, and they use it on a regular basis. Now they use this fique, this yellow thread regularly, and they have the because it's easy for them, and they adapt. I don't believe that. Please, I'm not sounding pessimist in this approach. I might sound, but it's not. I think that cultures evolve, and there is changes, and I think that it's just a matter of educating how these changes can take place. I think that Alan, through his films, could educate more about the impact of how we use, that they have an impact in the ecosystem, because the fact that they are introducing these threads into their constructions is problematic. So I think that they should learn about it too. What do you think?
Well, I think the idea that the Kogi should learn from us, and that we should go in there and teach the Kogi things, is not quite right. What you are actually describing seems to me a problem in a particular river valley where the traditional authorities have lost authority, and the voices that are being listened to are not the traditional voices. This is what actually destroys indigenous communities, and you don't change that by going in there and bolstering the traditional authorities from outside. The community has to deal with that itself. Personally, my experience is that the traditional authorities in the Sierra generally are still there. The meeting I'm going to next month will be a minimum of 30 mamas from all the different river valleys coming down. And so I will ask these questions about what is actually going on. I'm much more pessimistic about some things, but not about that. The real problem that is happening right now in the Sierra that I'm scared of is that the level of violence has gone up hugely. The murder of community leaders, both indigenous and non-indigenous, has been really serious. I mean, hundreds have been shot, killed this year. The indigenous villages are being deliberately burned to the ground. There are a large refugee problem now in the Sierra. This is a takeover, the final stage of colonization, I'm afraid, as mining rights have been given out. Hundreds of mining permits have been given out by the Colombian government. There is a desperate shortage of rare earths and rare materials. There is gold mining, but gold mining isn't the big issue. As you probably know, the world is shifting over to electric cars. And the problem with electric cars is that we're all supposed to drive electric cars as soon as possible, but at the moment we don't have enough cobalt to make electric cars work. So there is a desperate hunger for cobalt and similar other rare metals. This mining rights in the Sierra are really important, and if it's necessary to get rid of the indigenous people, that will happen. And I think that the paramilitaries in the Sierra, I may be wrong, but I believe that the paramilitaries in the Sierra are largely proxies of companies like Glencore, big mining companies. And I think that that is the real threat, much more than the threat of people making bags using plastic twine, and that the Kogi's vision that when the Sierra is conquered, finally, by the Colombian conquest, the world ends, has a great deal of validity to it.
But also, that is a reality, Alan. That is a reality. But I think that they are talking about the introduction of new materials in a community is fundamental, because it's at the base of what the universe is made of. How can they sustain a vision of taking care of their natural resources if they are introducing something that is not going to be healthy for their environment? So what I can do, and I talk from my perspective as my project is about materials, I think that is very important to have. They need to have that knowledge about how this new material affects their community, because I saw it, and you have the power to because maybe it might be a very silly ingredient that in this big ocean of issues that are confronting the Kogi community, but I do believe that is at the base of their knowledge. Weaving is the most important.
Are you not suggesting, Mia, that the elders are losing their authority in terms of being able to pass?
This is what I was saying.
Yeah, that's
because
what it sounds like.
It is.
That's what Alan seems to have described there as well, although he's saying there's an undermining of the authority, and you're suggesting that undermining authority is coming from
I think that
materials have been used.
That is my perspective is very superficial. With one visit, you cannot predict the whole what is happening in the whole ecosystem of La Sierra Nevada. I saw it. I was very lucky to arrive in a moment where there was a lot of movement in La Sierra because of the death of that specific mama. So I could see loads of things that were happening. And it is you see all the Kogis using mobiles, Kogis that they don't even speak well Spanish, and they are all communicating, and they have all the antennas to communicate, which is not bad, because this is they cannot be isolated forever. But what does imply having that connection with the outside world? Because the reason why they've been protected for millennia is because of that isolation. When there is not anymore, what is the new step? What is that evolution? Now, because we are here, we are interested, this generation, in their knowledge, which is not only a knowledge for them. They are trying to tell us, excuse me, but this is a knowledge for the whole humanity. So it's very important that this is coming out, and that is impacting our life too. That is what is most important. La Sierra as an ecosystem is suffering, but then what is that knowledge for us in different other places? And the map that Alan was showing is very important in that sense. That is not only there in La Sierra, it's everywhere. Maybe
it feels like there are two different sides to a same coin, and of course we all, in a very romantic way, we want to preserve the people and work with the Kogi and their traditions, their customs, and these microcosms that they're talking about, and multicosms, and it's extremely important, especially in a critical moment right now. So I think the wide question here is, how can we educate the people that are going to the Sierra? All of these, the tourists, or even people that are wanting to live with these communities, whether through projects like FiBRA or in collaborations, and how to create. Perhaps this is something that we can all question ourselves, or if anyone has a leading question to this, how can we think of bringing together the different perspectives into creating some kind of ethical stands for everyone that's coming.
But this is what we are all understanding today, and that's why I said that what the knowledge that the Kogi community is trying to awake us into is understanding that we're living in a plastic era. That's a fact. So this implies new challenges for our generations. What are the impact not only for is the ecosystem? Is not only for the visitors that are going to the Sierra and they don't throw a packet of crisps. If we live in our daily lives, it's changing our daily lives because it's not just protecting the Sierra per se. It's protecting the earth. Is a universe per se, and this is how we need to start.
And I guess we do have the plastic in one hand, we have the rare earths in the other. So I would like to open up to the public for questions.
So, well, I would coincide with Alan that of course there's a big problem that actually this repeats all over Latin America and from Ecuador, for example, in our communities. There have been large impact by the extractivism that's where it comes over everywhere with all the consumerism and extreme not knowing where the things that we all consume come from. That's a big thing. But I also coincide with I'm also with you in terms of plastic, because of course I don't think both of them are, well, you should pay attention to one thing more than the other, because both of them are actually very big things that will affect the future of the community. In terms of plastic, we're actually consuming 5 grams of plastic per week without knowing it. Because I know that it seems quite simplistic to say, okay, I use plastic and then maybe one day I'll throw away, but it will arrive to nature and it will stay there for thousands of years, of hundreds of years. And it's a big, very complicated system that actually, even though the solution might be at stopping the consuming plastic, it's also a political and an industrial issue. And I think education is like an important part of it. Like in terms of the community knowing what I know it's not that who has the right to educate our community. It's a very complicated issue.
Can I just ask what your question is?
Yeah, sorry about that. So, what perspective should we use to educate the communities? Like, how can we let them know without being too invasive into imposing our way of thinking on them?
I think, personally, I don't think you need to worry too much about a community like the Kogi knowing what plastic is. I don't think that we need to give them an education. Because they ask the questions themselves. The people who need education are the people who don't ask. When I first went into the Sierra, the community I went into, I was being asked constantly questions about things like, what are you wearing? The fibers of the clothing you're wearing. This is not a natural fiber. This is not cotton. This is not from an animal. What is it? And it was me that had to learn how to answer that question. Because I then had to think and then end up saying, what I'm wearing is entirely made of oil. I was wearing plastic. Very careful about not devaluing traditional authorities. That's where we do the harm, is by moving into an area like the Sierra and behaving in ways which give additional validity to people who are not the mamas, but who are the mamas' agents. And because those are the people who speak Spanish, we deal with them. And so they are able to provide solutions to people's problems. And young people see there's not much point in talking to a mama, because the mama can't talk to these people with the power and the money and the influence. But if I talk to that guy who speaks Spanish as well as Kogi, he can do things for me. And so the mamas lose their status. I've seen this happen in the Amazon, where shaman have been marginalized in communities because other people were able to exercise useful power in a way that the shamans couldn't. That's the way, and one of the primary ways in which we destroy indigenous communities is by making it much easier for people who speak our languages to reach solutions for things and to bring stuff into the community than the traditional authorities.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes, I'm from Colombia. Sorry, I'm from Colombia. My English is not good, it's my second language. I try to understand. I grew in Colombia. When I grew in Colombia, I was in my childhood. The indigenous have rights. The vision of the indigenous and the normal population and the majorities was person that don't have rights. You don't have rights, no respect indigenous. This is the reality, this is the situation now. And you don't have rights about these people, the minorities group, the original people is ignorant. Is the problem in Colombia now is colonization. Not finish the colonization. In Colombia, become independent, but not descolonized. No was a process descolonization. The perception of the indigenous as a second citizens. They is strange people from the urban people is strange people. Who is these people? Yeah. I was in area bordered with Venezuela. I remember when I was a child, the Tunerbos, the indigenous Tunerbos was using the same cotton, wear the same cotton than the indigenous in the Sierra. Disappear, extinguishing, killing these people and your environment, and your land, and your culture, and your tradition, and your common vision. This is the big concern, not only in Colombia. Now was tomorrow in Brazil, the new president, it's the same situation. Entonces, it's a crusade against the indigenous. My question is, how we can to change the cultural perception about the indigenous? It's a cultural. How to change this?
But then,
A question goes to
but then this is, so I'm going to extend it. I'm going to make it a little bit more universal. So, for instance, women's rights. How do you make a woman right more prominent, and you need to, what is happening right now is giving a voice to women. So there is platforms for women to be stronger. There is the people is fighting in order to have the same salary. They are putting women a little bit in a pedestal at the beginning. Now, a little bit more as a pedestal. We need to have women here in order to understand that we need to have the same rights as men. At some point, that pedestal needs to go down, and then we all need to be the same. This is what I think. This is a very personal perspective. That should happen with indigenous communities, starting the governments, because that is not only here us here. They should be programs with the government to make those communities important. They need to be put in a pedestal. Maybe it's bad because that brings tourism. We know that we are in an era where everything is a little bit important. It needs to be commercialized, and that is happening in La Sierra. In La Sierra, everybody goes because it's interesting. The indigenous communities are disappearing, so let's go to La Sierra. So that needs to come from governments to make them important important and protected. But that cannot be just from the people, from ours. It needs to be a very, very strong governmental policy to make it happen. Otherwise, it's not going to come from anyone.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. I think it's fantastic. My name is Nicole. I'm an anthropologist from Colombia. Actually, I'm studying my master's degree in Women, Peace and Security at the London School of Economics. And I give you all this introduction because what we're facing now is a classic debate in the anthropology about representation and authority. And I think it's really important to have these kind of debates, and I think it's also important to reflect about our position that we are having here and our privileges. I think we cannot say there's just one way, there's just one solution to face this issue, because actually we don't need to save our indigenous communities or our Afro-Colombian communities either. I think that's not that's not the key question. But I think it's important to be reflective about the issues of representation, neo-coloniality, neo-colonialism, and representation. So my question is this one: you, as privileged people who are living in the global north, how do you reflect on these kind of discourses that we have had in our long history? How do you plan to reflect about it? That's it. Thank you.
Well, I'm not quite sure what kind of answer to give to that question, but one element from my perspective is that the question for me is, what can we persuade Colombian non-indigenous society to do and think and behave like in a way which is compatible with the survival, existence, and learning from indigenous society? One aspect of that is one of validation and enhancing the value of the indigenous society to the Colombian non-indigenous society. Tourism is an element in that. Tourism is a way of giving value. If it's tourism to indigenous people, it's a way for Colombian society to see that there is an economic value in the treasuring of indigenous communities, and that changes their status completely. Rather than valuing the resources they're sitting on, valuing them. Another element is one of physical security, of course, that the Colombian government is at the moment in denial of the issues of physical security in the Sierra. The reason is that they think that they're going to get more tourism by pretending that there's nothing going wrong. That will inevitably change. There was a time when Colombia Santa Marta was keen to build with Japanese investment, an aerial transport system carrying a kind of ski lift, carrying passengers up to the lost city. And at that time, I said to the press, I think that this will be greeted with huge enthusiasm by the guerrillas, who will see it as a delivery system for hostage taking. And at that point, the Japanese pulled out. It was the only way I could think of stopping this from happening. And we need to be smart about the way we approach these things, is what I'm saying.
Well, on that lighter note.
Another thing is the role of the international community. And this morning, in your exposition, you speak about the UNESCO.
Yes.
The UNESCO, this place considered protected, but UNESCO needs effective protection in the reality.
And UNESCO doesn't do this.
Huh?
No.
UNESCO doesn't do that.
Yeah,
It puts a
exactly.
label, but it does nothing beyond the label.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Everyone, we are going to have a 10-minute break. Please, a round of applause for a wonderful And I think we all want some coffee and tea. So let's have 10 minutes, and please keep up for a wonderful talk with Cameron McKay on the Scottish environment, which will be really interesting. So see you in a bit.